Hello, Honors 410. I hope everyone had a great weekend. So for today's class, I wanted to lead things off just first by debriefing the flash fiction pieces that were submitted for last time, and to compliment our first set of writers on what I thought were really strong group of flash pieces for us to review. They were really diverse in terms of the concerns they were taking on and how they considered violence, which is great because I really want this to be relatively open-ended. For those who are a little bit stumped on this assignment as your due date is rapidly approaching for many of you, I encourage you look back at the description of the assignment on the syllabus and some of the examples that are given. You don't necessarily need to portray violence directly. For example, what we had one piece this previous time that dealt with what appeared to be violent imagery but was actually the process of slicing tomatoes, which I thought was a nice subversion of our expectations on that. We had another that more literally portrayed a battle scene. Actually, two that really kind of did that in their own sort of separate ways. From a more realistic bend to a more fantasy bend, all of that's fair game. This assignment is really meant to be pretty open-ended. If there's any argument at all to be made that it's dealing with violence in some way, or kind of the effects of violence, or allusions to violence, that it will probably be fair game for this assignment. If you have ideas but they feel as though they might be walking a line of where they're really relevant to this class, feel free to shoot me an email with some of those general ideas you're thinking about, and I'm happy to mull that over with you and kind of confirm that you're already on the right track enough as far as I'm concerned, or what it would take to kind of take that extra step to get it in line with what I'm looking for in this class. But I think you'll find I as the person who's grading the assignment, I'm pretty open-ended about this and pretty open-minded, and I think you'll find your classmates in general are as well. And that's the other big thing I wanted to get to was complimenting so many of you who contributed really positively to the discussion of each other's pieces. It's one of those things where I leave this open-ended. You don't have to respond to every single piece. Some of you did, which I think is great. But I think it is a good habit to get into of kind of reading the others' work with an eye towards what can you say about this thing, right? Because I think that's good practice for live class discussions, for essay assignments. And for all sorts of things, and oftentimes even moving in to periods beyond this class, but other classes and your professional careers as well, where you may be called to give feedback about things or respond to things, to get in the habit of taking some notes down and thinking about what's good about this thing or what interests me about this thing. I think that's a really worthwhile exercise in general. So great work on that first round of it. I look forward to us keeping up with that. And again, keep experimenting. Just because our first three submissions were successful doesn't mean that we need to follow the template that one of those three set up. Feel free to do your own thing with that. On the same note, I should also say, if you were thinking something along similar lines and someone does a somewhat similar story, don't take that as grounds you need to change it up, right? I will usually give the benefit of the doubt and assume you are not, borrowing too much from anyone else's ideas, unless it's directly plagiarism, where it's clear you're just really just changing the names, using the same story, that sort of thing. And if you're worried about again walking that line, touch base with me, and we'll see what we can come up with, and confirm that you're on a fair track for that. Okay, so with all that said, the next thing I want to do for today's class was to introduce the critical essay assignment. And to be transparent, this is really early for this, at least in my estimation. What we're getting ahead of the game on this thing. The main reason why I like to be ahead, I think we have a solid 3 weeks before this thing is actually due at this point. But the reason I like to choose it so far ahead is to give you plenty of time to start thinking about this. I know for some folks, when you get an assignment like an essay, you start writing really early and take lots of time to revise or to gather your ideas and brainstorm. And it really is a solid week or two process to write the thing. I know for other students, you're not actually going to start writing until a couple days before it's due. And while I personally sort of encourage you to get started early, I get that people have different work processes, and if it's working for you, then so be it. But I don't think it hurts to at least have it in the back of your mind. There is going to be an essay coming up. Let me at least make some even unconscious, kind of subconscious notes about things that interest me, themes I'm kind of identifying, arguments that I think are worth making because I see it in this text, or because I really resonate and agree or really disagree with something somebody said in the discussion thread. A lot of times those are kind of good cues that this is something you could write something more substantial about. So I'm going to leave the prompt for this assignment, the grade guide, in the discussion thread, but I'm also going to just kind of scan through the document here. So if you want to open that up while I'm talking about it, I think that's a good idea, just to make sure you can kind of follow along and see where questions might come up. But so, for this assignment, again, it's 3 weeks out, so by that time we'll have done all the more reading for class. We'll have finished Don Lee's Yellow, as well as all of those readings from the PDFs we did the first part of class, and we'll have started Stephen Moore's The Longer We Were There. So you're going to have a lot of content that you can potentially tap into. For assignment, you need to use at least one of the class readings. You're welcome to use multiple ones. I welcome you even to delve into some of the student work if some of that resonates with you for the purposes of this assignment. But I just use at least one of the assigned formal course readings. So at least one of those PDFs, like the Justin St. Germain piece on murder tourism, or the Kathy Ulrich pieces about the murdered women, or the Rex King piece, The People's Elbow. Any of that sort of stuff is fair game. The Don Lee is fair game. The essays from Stephen Moore that we'll have read by that point are fair game. And if you've been reading ahead a little bit and want to even bring us in we haven't formally read yet with the class, in general, I will entertain that. Give me a heads up that's kind of the focus of your essay, because in most cases I'll be fine with it, but just that's a little bit unusual for this assignment, so I just want to make sure you're on the right track if that is the case. So for this assignment, the big crux of it is you're making an argument. So it is a thesis-driven essay. You've got to have a thesis. You've got to have body paragraphs that are supporting that thesis. It's a relatively short essay, 2 to 3 pages in length. So when I say 2 to 3 pages, that means minimum 2 full pages. So the actual text of the writing of your paper is getting to the bottom of that second page. As long as you're doing that, you're meeting the page length requirement. If you go a little bit over, that's fine with me. I don't mind if you go, once you get to 3, 4, 5 pages, if it's much over 5 pages, then I might sort of reserve the right to stop reading just for the sake of keeping up a decent pace with my own grading. I don't expect very many of you will want to do that, but I expect there might be a number of you who want to go on to beyond 3 pages onto a 4th page, for example. That's totally fine if that's where you're going. I'm not going to penalize you for it. I'm also not going to penalize you if you just have 2 full pages and then a works cited. That is fair game for this assignment as well. But I introduced some potential questions or arguments you might think about. So the examples I use here are the role of violence in storytelling in our culture, why violence is or is not appealing in media or literature, why it helps or hinders our society, how an individual piece is valuable to our understanding of humanity, and why we turn to violence for entertainment or for enrichment, as the prompt says. I think these are all interesting questions which we've gotten to in one way or another with our readings so far, and we'll continue to get at directly or indirectly for a number of the readings to follow. But this assignment is meant to be really open-ended. So definitely don't feel like you need to answer all of those questions or address all of those concerns. Those are just some ideas to get you thinking, especially if you're the kind of person who struggles to think of good thesis statements. If you were to answer one of those questions with your point of view supported by one or more of the texts, you're on the right track. You can do really well with this assignment if you do that. Because it's such a short essay and because I'm asking you to use some of the course readings, I'm asking you not to lean into outside research. If you have a specific idea you're already mulling over or a specific other reading that really connects to one of the readings we've done in class, and some of you have journaled about that sort of thing, that's fair game. I'll entertain that. Just let me know what you're thinking in those cases. Again, it's a little unusual for me to say I don't want research, but the idea is that with only 2 to 3 pages to work with, and using at least one of our course readings, if you start to introduce other outside research as well, all of a sudden it can be really hard to wrangle this thing in and make a coherent argument where your voice is really heard. So, and also I just want to kind of rein in the workload for this assignment, right? Because it's a significant assignment for the class, but it's not meant to be something that you're spending arduous hours upon hours on, but rather something you're just putting a good faith effort of kind of using the reading to craft an argument. So I'm including a grade guide as well that I'm not really going to go over in any detail here. I often look at grade guides. I mean, it looks like a rubric like you might have gotten in high school. The reason I include those is sort of mostly as a checklist. So if you read through this prompt, if you brainstorm, if you start drafting, I think that's a good time then to look at the grade guide. And if you can look at it as a checklist and say legitimately, I'm doing all of these things and I think I'm doing all of them well, it's almost hard to do badly on the assignment at that point. Whereas if you have your draft ready, you've gone over it a couple times, you read through the grade guide and you say, well, I'm not really doing that or that or that or that. all of a sudden it becomes pretty hard to do well on the assignment, right? Because you're no longer meeting the expectations that I've laid out for you. So, most of what's in the grade guide is largely repetitive to what's in the prompt in one way or another, but nonetheless, presented, I think, in a useful format to go over. And then also there's the last paragraph under the first section of the prompt where I just go over formatting expectations. So I say, 12-point Times New Roman font or something similar, double spaced 1-inch margins. That's all relatively standard. You do need an MLA formatted works cited. If you're really accustomed to a different style, I know some people use APA in their major, a handful of I've heard use Chicago. I'm okay with using a different style. Just give me the heads up if you're planning to not use MLA, just so I have a sense of that. Usually if I can recognize the style you're using, I've seen a good faith effort, you're probably going to be just fine on that aspect of the assignment. But I encourage you to, review the readings, look back at your reading response journals to see kind of themes of things you've been writing about a lot. So, some of you, I think, more or less have essay themes kind of outlined for yourself if you go back and look at them. And to look back at the class discussions. And the way it's worded in the prompt is notes from your class discussions. It's kind of geared more towards the in-person version of this class. Again, one of the real benefits of having this online format, having the discussion threads, is that's all documented for you. You don't have to have been taking notes live in class, but rather you can just go back and reread those discussions, and that itself might spark something for you about what you want to craft something about. So that's all I'm going to say about the critical essay assignment for now. Again, it's assignment, I think it's totally doable in a week or so's time for most students, but I'm giving you, again, a good bit of lead time, a solid 3 weeks. For those of you who take a little bit longer for this sort of thing, if you were to tackle this as, a half page a day even, you could have a full draft of this within a week's time, and that gives you plenty of time to, revise and change things up and go back and, and really kind of polish this thing with plenty of time still to spare before the due date. So, okay, so I'm going to leave that there for now, although I'll definitely field questions for that in the discussion thread as well. Otherwise, though, for today's class, one last thing I should mention, just a reminder, Flash Cluster 2 is due for next time. So again, we'll have some more of that kind of discussion for next class. But okay, so to go ahead to the reading for this time, though, our second section from yellow here. I'm going to have a few places I'm going to take this again, but again, I'm also going to leave this, relatively open-ended for you to do with as you may and kind of talk about what stood out to you from the reading. But the first place I wanted to go was on page 210. There's this part, it's in the first paragraph that comes in from the previous page, where he's talking about there were no displays of bravado, no loud machismo in evidence. This was mostly Portillo's doing, or Portillo's doing, I should probably the correct pronunciation. Why might this be surprising? This idea that there'd be no bravado, no machismo kind of demonstrated. It's interesting, I think, that we get this noted for us. And so I am curious about, do we expect bravado, machismo in kind of a fight atmosphere, right? Because I think that there's a way in which we do, but there also might be a way in which it sort of makes sense that there wouldn't be, given the context that we're given here. The next part I want to go to was the very next page, 211. This first big paragraph before the break there. I'm just going to go ahead and read this part. Just by adopting this attitude as his own, an act of will, Danny felt more confident. He had reason to be. He was in terrific shape. At an even 6 feet, he still weighed no more than 150 pounds, but he was strong and quick if he had to be. Or if he had to, he could probably lay out the biggest football player on the high school team. And the best part for Danny was that no one knew. He hadn't told any of his classmates about the boxing, mostly because when he was still a neophyte, he worried he might be ridiculed or even challenged. It turned out he liked having a life secret from others. He was happy, perfectly satisfied with the way things were going, until one night Portillo mentioned that all the boys should think about competing in the boxing tournament next spring, the San Vicente County Amateur Championships. So the thing I wanted to mull over was about this secret life. Because last time I'd raised the question about why there would be some sort of appreciation or some fulfillment in the idea that Danny knew he could drop somebody. We had some good discussions, some good responses in the online discussion thread about that. But now we talk about appreciating this secret life. And I'm curious if people can relate to this. And this may have nothing to do with violence on the surface. And that's going to be something we'll talk about throughout this class, especially as we get into the Stephen Moore book. we're looking at these things, violence and through is a pretty broad lens, and also we're not shying away from other content, other themes that these readings bring up. This appeal of having a secret life or a separate life from kind of his mainstream life. I'm curious of what we make of that, why that would be something that Danny might value. And if any of you have had experiences like that, maybe you don't want to talk about your secret life if you have it going on now, but I think many of us in our younger years might have had something like that where we had something we were really invested in that we kept apart from most of the people who knew us, most of our friends. So I'm curious about reactions to that. On upper 212, I'm not going to read a passage here, but there's a reference of kind of a fear of sparring, and I'm curious what people make of that. And this overlaps with a lot of our discussion already, so I'm not going to belabor that too much. But why there might be a fear of sparring, even amidst kind of this intensive training for the sport of boxing, where that would feel pretty integral. In the middle of page 212, Portillo, he says it's different for Danny. And so let me see if I can find that moment here. Yeah, it says, so for you, I know it's different, he told Danny. You got college, maybe you'll be a lawyer someday. You got choices. That's why you could never be pro. You knew that coming in. If you'd said different, I'd have said walk. But you surprised me. You stuck with it. You become a good boxer. And that was news to Danny, and it goes on from there. And, this isn't a trick question. It's kind of spelled out pretty cleanly here. But what is Portillo saying about how it's different for Danny? Why is it different for him from other people who Portillo is training? And how does this maybe connect? On page 214, we get to Danny's mom's perception of boxing, that it's a sport for poor people, right? How that might connect there. Because I think there is a real meaningful connection between those two ideas. And then I want to cut ahead a little bit to page 220. So there's some talk about the Vietnam War here, about it being kind of inhuman is the way it's kind of characterized. And he talks about sort of dehumanizing of Asian people at large, not just Vietnamese people, but we talked a little bit about that last time, about this kind of overgeneralization, and kind of some racial elements are kind of embedded in that, right? But how the war is characterized in that way. Why would Danny sort of see it this way? And he uses this adjective, atavistic, right? That's at the end of that first paragraph after the break there, on 220. I know you probably can't really see what I'm pointing at, but you have some general sense of the shape of the text. Maybe that'll help you find it. The word atavistic, it means reversion to something ancient. So almost something instinctive, as opposed to kind of our more refined, more advanced thought processes. And so I would suggest he's saying something about essentially racism, right? But essentially how we kind of see people who are other, or how we lump people together in sort of an instinctive way that is inhuman, right? That is not kind of in line with sort of our better selves, or our more advanced, evolved selves. So that's some food for thought. Again, there's plenty more embedded here, so I welcome you to talk about any of that kind of engages you. But thanks as always for watching today's video, and I'll look forward to our discussion thread.